In the grand tapestry of the cosmos, some heroes are forged in the fire of dying stars, their names etched into the history of galactic wars. Others are born to rule, their destinies written in the ancient blood of kings. But sometimes, in the quiet, forgotten corners of the universe, a hero is not born of fire or blood. Sometimes, the destiny of an entire species rests on the shoulders of a simple, forgotten boy and the impossible friendship he forges with a dying beast. This is the story of a kindness that awakened a legend, and a stable boy who reminded the galaxy that true royalty is not a matter of birth, but of the heart. The dust in the royal stables of Eridor had a memory. It was an ancient dust, a fine powder composed of crushed moon rock, dried alien hay, and the microscopic shed scales of the glorious winged beasts that had served the monarchy for centuries. Kaelen, a boy whose own past was as blurry and undefined as a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam, knew its every texture and scent. His small world was this dust, the rough, worn feel of a wooden cleaning tool in his hands, and the warm, comforting, earthy smell of the creatures he cared for. Here, in the cavernous, vaulted stables carved from the planet's living rock, he was simply known as the boy. He was a ghost in the periphery of royal life, a silent, shuffling figure, ignored by the loud, boisterous stable hands who spent their days grooming the prized, jewel-toned war drakes and polishing the silver bridles of the royal griffins. They saw him as little more than another tool, the one who did the work no one else wanted. But Kaelen didn't mind the anonymity. In fact, he found a quiet solace in it. It allowed him his secret rituals, his small, unseen acts of kindness that no one would ever acknowledge or understand. He would save the sweetest, juiciest part of his meager bread ration for an old, one-eyed mare lizard whispering to her as she ate. He would spend extra time with the nervous, newly hatched griffins, his gentle, humming presence a stark contrast to the harsh, guttural commands of the trainers. He saw the souls within the beasts, the flicker of fear in their reptilian eyes, the quiet, weary dignity in their posture. He understood them, perhaps because he too felt like a creature in a cage not of his own making, his worth defined only by his utility to others. An orphan, brought to the palace as a nameless child, part of a tithe from a forgotten outer province, Kaelen had no memory of a family. His life was a flat, unchanging landscape of hard physical work, followed by the deep, dreamless sleep of utter exhaustion. Yet sometimes, in the cold, quiet moments just before the twin moons of Eridor set, he would pause his sweeping. He would lean on his broom and look up through the high arched windows of the stable. He would see the faint, glittering trail of a starship cutting across the velvet blackness of space, and a profound, aching loneliness would settle in his chest. He yearned for something more, a connection, a purpose beyond the endless cycle of dust and hay. He felt like a bird born with clipped wings, able to see the sky, but never to fly. He had long since accepted his place. He was Kaelen, the stable boy. He was invisible. That was his reality. He would live and die in the shadow of this grand palace, his only legacy the quiet comfort of the creatures no one else truly saw. He believed this with the simple, unwavering certainty of a boy who had never been given a reason to hope for anything different. But tonight, as a cold, biting wind howled through the high arches of the stable, carrying the scent of imminent rain, it also carried a sound that did not belong, a low, guttural rumble of pain that would forever shatter the quiet, predictable rhythm of his small, dusty world. The sound was a deep, mournful vibration, less a noise and more a feeling that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the mountain. It wasn't the boisterous, challenging roar of a healthy war drake vying for dominance, nor the playful, high-pitched yelp of a griffin chick demanding its meal. This was a sound of profound, ancient suffering, a private agony that had accidentally escaped into the cold night air. It resonated with a part of Kaelen he rarely acknowledged, and it drew him in with an irresistible, somber pull. The other stable hands, huddled around a crackling orange fire pit near the main entrance, were laughing loudly, their voices a jarring, ignorant counterpoint to the gathering storm outside and the quiet tragedy unfolding within. They either didn't hear the sound, or more likely, they chose to ignore it. It was easier that way. Kaelen picked up his old, oil-burning lantern. Its warm, flickering light cast a small, brave circle of gold against the encroaching darkness, pushing back the oppressive shadows that clung to the high, vaulted ceilings. He made his way towards the old, forgotten section of the stables, a place the younger hands called the boneyard. It was a ruin, a place where the royal family interred the beasts that were too old, too sick, or too broken to serve the monarchy's grand purpose. It was a place of ghosts and sad memories, a final silent chapter for creatures who had once been legends. The air grew colder as he walked, thick with the smell of damp stone, decaying hay, and a strange metallic scent that reminded Kaelen of ozone after a lightning strike. He followed the sound down a long, drafty corridor to a massive iron-barred enclosure at the very end, an area sealed off from the main stable. Inside, barely visible in the gloom that his lantern struggled to pierce, was a creature of myth. It was a dragon, not one of the sleek jewel-toned drakes the princes rode in parades, their scales glittering like emeralds and sapphires. This was a true ancient dragon, a being of colossal size and forgotten power. Its scales, which must have once been the color of molten gold, were now dull and faded, flaking away in places to reveal the pale, scarred, leathery skin beneath. One of its magnificent horn-like crests was broken, shattered halfway down its length. Its vast wing membranes, which had once caught the solar winds, were tattered and torn, looking more like a forgotten ship's sail than a tool of flight. It lay in a heap on the cold stone floor, its massive ribcage rising and falling with shallow, ragged, painful breaths. This was Ignis, the once glorious, a name Kaelen had only ever heard in hushed, fearful whispers. He had been the previous king's mount, a legend in the sky, a living weapon of fire and fury. But age and a long-forgotten battle on a nameless moon had taken their toll. Now he was just a relic, a living monument to a past era, an embarrassment to the proud and pragmatic Prince Valerius. He had been cast aside, left here in the darkness to await the slow, undignified release of death. The other stable hands were terrified of him. They would slide his meager rations of tough meat and brackish water through a small slot at the bottom of the bars and flee before he could even stir. They saw a monster, a volatile beast in its final agonizing throes. Kaelen, however, saw something different. He moved closer, holding his lantern high, the light glinting in the dragon's vast, clouded eye. In that pool of molten gold, now filmed over with the cataracts of age, he saw not malice, not anger, but a deep, soul-crushing loneliness. He saw a king in exile, a warrior forgotten. It was a loneliness that echoed the vast, empty spaces in his own heart. The dragon let out another low groan of pain, and Kaelen knew, with a certainty that defied all logic and fear, that he could not simply walk away. Fear was a practical, necessary tool in the royal stables. It was a healthy respect for the natural order of things. It kept you from getting too close to a griffin's razor-sharp claws, or from walking directly behind a startled, half-wild war drake. Every instinct in Kaelen's young body, honed by a short life of caution, survival, and knowing his place, screamed at him to back away from the dying dragon. Ignis was a force of nature, even in his decay. The sheer scale of him was terrifying. A single lazy flick of his tail could shatter stone, and the immense heat that still radiated from his massive body was a constant low-level reminder of the cataclysmic fire that slept, however fitfully, within his belly. But the profound, crushing loneliness that Kaelen saw reflected in the ancient creature's gaze was, in that moment, a stronger and more compelling force than his own fear. It was a feeling he knew intimately. He understood, in a way the boisterous, well-fed stable hands never could, what it felt like to be left alone in the dark, forgotten by the world. The next day, after the grueling morning chores were done and the other hands had gathered for their noisy midday meal, Kaelen made his choice. He took the most valuable part of his own meager ration, a thick slice of coarse, dark bread and a bruised but surprisingly sweet pear, and made his way back to the forgotten enclosure. He moved slowly, deliberately, making no sudden sounds. He didn't speak. He simply approached the heavy iron bars, his heart pounding a steady, nervous rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of fear and resolve. Ignis was awake, his great, clouded head resting wearily on the cold stone floor. He watched Kaelen's approach, and a low, warning growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound like a distant gathering rockslide. The air in the corridor grew warmer, and the metallic scent of ozone intensified, a clear and present threat. Kaelen froze, every muscle in his body tensed, ready to flee. He held out the offering in his small, trembling hand, a simple, silent gesture of peace. The growl continued, a constant low-frequency vibration that seemed to shake the very air, but it did not escalate. Kaelen stood there for what felt like an eternity, his arm outstretched, his gaze steady and respectful, not challenging. He was not a threat, and his entire posture, his entire being, communicated that simple, undeniable truth. He was just a boy, offering a piece of his own food to a fellow forgotten creature. Slowly, with a monumental effort that sent tremors of exertion through his ancient withered frame, Ignis lifted his massive head. He sniffed the air, his great flared nostrils quivering. He looked at the humble offering of bread and pear, then back at Kaelen, his single clouded golden eye holding a flicker of something that looked like cautious, weary curiosity. With a slowness that was almost painful to watch, the dragon extended his long serpentine neck through the bars. His snout, covered in scales as large and as hard as a man's hand, came to rest just inches from Kaelen's offering. The intense heat from his breath washed over Kaelen's hand and face, smelling of brimstone and ancient sun-baked earth. Kaelen did not flinch. He held his ground, his trust an unspoken promise. After a final hesitant moment, a long forked tongue, surprisingly gentle, flickered out and delicately took the bread and the pear from his hand. Ignis retracted his head and began to chew slowly, thoughtfully. The low, menacing growl in his chest subsided, replaced by a softer, almost inaudible rumble. It was not a sound of aggression, but something else entirely. Kaelen didn't know what it meant, but he knew it wasn't a threat. He had made a connection. It was a fragile, silent, and utterly impossible beginning. Weeks bled into a quiet, secret routine. The friendship, if it could be called that, between the boy and the dragon, was forged in silence and small, consistent acts of kindness. Every day, Kaelen would set aside a portion of his own food, sometimes a piece of bread, sometimes a rare fruit, and make the solitary journey to the forgotten enclosure. The other stable hands had long since stopped questioning his solitary habits, dismissing him as the strange, quiet orphan who preferred the company of beasts to people. Their dismissal was his shield, the cloak of invisibility that allowed his secret to flourish. He would sit just outside the bars, talking to Ignis in a low, soft murmur. He told the ancient dragon about his day, about the arrogance of the war drakes, the cleverness of a mother griffin hiding her eggs, the mundane, everyday details of his small, lonely life. He didn't know if the dragon understood his words, but it didn't seem to matter. Ignis in turn began to change. The transformation was slow, almost imperceptible at first. His movements became less pained, his breathing a little deeper. The clouded film over his golden eyes seemed to recede slightly, revealing a spark of ancient, weary intelligence that had been long dormant. He no longer growled when Kaelen approached. Instead, he would greet the boy with a low, guttural rumble, a sound that vibrated not with threat, but with a deep, resonant sense of recognition. Kaelen started bringing more than just food. He would haul buckets of fresh, clean water to the enclosure, replacing the stagnant, brackish liquid left by the other hands. He found a stiff, bristled broom, and would spend hours carefully sweeping the accumulated filth from the parts of the enclosure he could reach through the bars. He even began to clean Ignis's faded scales, using a soft, damp cloth to wipe away the layers of dust and grime, revealing the faint ghost of the molten gold that lay beneath. It was during one of these quiet grooming sessions that he first noticed the warmth. As he gently cleaned a large scale near the dragon's massive shoulder, he felt a strange, pleasant heat seep into his hand, a warmth that felt different from the dragon's normal body heat. It felt like a gentle, living energy, a quiet thrum of power. Ignis seemed to lean into his touch, a soft rumble of what sounded like contentment vibrating through his massive frame. This silent communication became their language. Kaelen would speak of his loneliness, and Ignis would respond with this quiet, comforting warmth. The boy, who had never known the touch of a loving parent, found a strange paternal comfort in the presence of the dying beast, and the dragon, who had been left to die alone in the darkness, found a final, unexpected spark of connection in the gentle, fearless touch of a human child. Their friendship was a fragile sanctuary, a small pocket of warmth and light in the cold, indifferent world of the royal stables. Kaelen looked forward to these stolen moments more than anything else. They were the anchor of his day, the one time he felt truly seen, truly valued. He was no longer just the boy who cleaned the stables. He was the friend of a king, the confidant of a legend. The secret they shared was a precious, dangerous thing, a bond forged in the quiet understanding of two lonely souls. But the shadows of the palace were long, and the world outside their small, dark enclosure was about to intrude in the most brutal way imaginable, threatening to extinguish the one small flame of hope Kaelen had managed to kindle in his life. The architect of that intrusion was Prince Valerius, the heir to the throne of Eridor. He was a man carved from sharp angles and cold ambition, his handsome features perpetually fixed in a mask of arrogant disdain. He moved through the world with the easy, thoughtless cruelty of someone who had never been denied anything. To Valerius, the royal stables were not a sanctuary for magnificent creatures, they were a showcase of his family's power, a collection of living assets to be displayed, used and discarded as he saw fit. He saw the dragons not as sentient beings with histories and souls, but as symbols of his royal might, their worth measured only by the ferocity of their roar and the brilliance of their scales. An old broken dragon was in his eyes a stain upon that image, a symbol of decay and weakness that he would not tolerate. His visit to the stables was a grand, disruptive affair. He arrived with an entourage of sycophantic nobles and armored guards, his laughter echoing unnaturally in the usually quiet space. The stable hands scrambled to present the finest wardrakes, their scales polished to a mirror shine. Valerius inspected them with a critical, dismissive eye, finding fault where there was none. Kaelen tried to make himself invisible, retreating into the shadows of a hayloft, his heart pounding with a sense of impending dread. He watched as the prince, bored with the pristine wardrakes, decided to tour the entire facility, his gaze falling upon the darker, older sections. "And what relic do we have languishing here?" Valerius asked, his voice dripping with mockery, as he approached the forgotten enclosure at the end of the corridor. The stable master, a gruff, hardened man who nonetheless feared the prince's wrath, bowed low. "That is Ignis, your highness, the mount of your late grandfather." Valerius peered through the bars into the gloom, a look of profound disgust twisting his features. Ignis, sensing the hostile presence, had risen partially, a low, threatening growl rumbling in his chest. "This pathetic, broken thing," the prince sneered. "It is an embarrassment. Look at it. Its fire is gone, its wings are tattered. It is a disgrace to the memory of my grandfather, and to the glory of our house." He turned to the stable master, his eyes cold and hard. "I am having this section of the stables renovated for the new storm griffins arriving next month. I want this enclosure cleansed." The word hung in the air, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Cleansed. It was a royal euphemism, a sterile clinical term for a brutal, undignified execution. Kaelen, watching from the shadows above, felt the blood drain from his face. They were going to kill Ignis. They were going to kill his friend. The stable master, to his credit, hesitated. "Your highness, he is ancient, perhaps a more honorable." The prince cut him off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. "Honor is for the strong. This creature is a symbol of weakness. Its continued existence is an insult. See to it. I want it gone by the new moon." With that, Valerius turned and swept out of the stables, his entourage trailing in his wake, leaving behind a chilling silence and the death sentence of a king. Kaelen remained frozen in the hayloft, the prince's cruel words echoing in his ears, a helpless, cold fury building in his chest. The simple, quiet world he had built with Ignis was about to be shattered. The prince's decree was a death knell that echoed in the deepest parts of Kaelen's soul. Cleansed. The word was a poison, a cold, sterile term for an act of profound cruelty. Kaelen spent the next few days in a haze of quiet desperation, his chores a blur of automatic movements, his mind racing to find a solution that did not exist. He pleaded with the stable master, a man he had served silently and loyally for years. He tried to explain that Ignis was not just a beast, that he was intelligent, that he was a friend. The stable master, a man whose own heart had been hardened by a lifetime of serving the whims of kings and princes, simply shook his head, his eyes filled with a grim pity. "The prince has given an order, boy," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "My hands are tied. There is nothing to be done. Stay away from that enclosure. It is no longer your concern." His words were a wall, a final, insurmountable barrier of authority. Kaelen felt a profound sense of helplessness wash over him, a feeling he knew all too well. It was the same helplessness he felt as an orphan, a nameless, faceless boy in a world of kings and princes. He was powerless. That night, under the cold, watchful eyes of the twin moons, he made his way to Ignis's enclosure for what he feared would be the last time. He brought with him a whole roasted fowl, stolen from the palace kitchens at great personal risk. It was a feast, a final offering to a condemned king. Ignis was quiet, his massive form a study in stillness, but Kaelen could feel the deep resonant sorrow that emanated from him. The dragon knew. Kaelen sat on the cold stone floor, just outside the bars, and shared his own grief, his voice a low, heartbroken whisper in the darkness. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "I tried. I'm so sorry." As he spoke, he reached through the bars and placed his small, trembling hand on the dragon's massive, scaled snout. Ignis did not pull away. Instead, he leaned into the touch, and in that moment of shared despair, something shifted. The familiar, gentle warmth that Kaelen had felt before now intensified, flooding his senses. It was not just a feeling, a sudden breathtaking torrent of images and emotions not his own, poured into his mind. He saw the world through the dragon's eyes. He felt the joy of his first flight, soaring above clouds of impossible colors. He saw battles fought among the stars, the searing heat of enemy plasma, the fierce loyalty of a dragon to his rider. He felt the profound, aching grief of watching his king, Kaelen's own prince's grandfather, die in his arms on a forgotten battlefield. And he felt the slow, crushing weight of loneliness and neglect that had defined his final years. It was a lifetime of glory and sorrow, poured into Kaelen's mind in a single, overwhelming instant. The psychic link was no longer a flicker, it was a blazing conduit of shared consciousness. Kaelen gasped, the sheer intensity of the experience bringing tears to his eyes. He was no longer just feeling sympathy for the dragon, he was feeling with him, and in the depths of that shared mind, Ignis showed him one final, crucial memory. The memory Ignis shared was ancient, almost primal. It was a vision, not of battle or sorrow, but of a time long past, a golden age whispered about only in the oldest dragon sagas. Kaelen saw a vast sun-drenched valley on a world he did not recognize. He saw dragons, hundreds of them, their scales glittering like a river of jewels under a warm, gentle sun. But they were not alone. Moving among them, with a grace and confidence that spoke of a deep symbiotic relationship, were humans. These were not kings or knights in shining armor. They were simple folk, dressed in plain, woven tunics. They walked among the colossal beasts without fear, their hands resting on scaled flanks, their voices a soft murmur of a shared language. It was a scene of perfect, breathtaking harmony. Then the vision focused on a single powerful image, a young human, a boy no older than Kaelen, standing before a great elder dragon. The dragon bowed its magnificent head, and the boy placed his hand upon its snout. As he did, a faint, intricate, glowing symbol blazed to life on the boy's forearm. It was a mark of connection, a sigil of a sacred bond between the two species. The memory was a fragment of a forgotten history, a time when certain human bloodlines possessed the innate ability to form a deep psychic link with dragonkind. They were not masters and servants, but partners, equals. They were the dragon speakers. The vision was so vivid, so real, that Kaelen could almost feel the warmth of that forgotten sun on his own skin. As the memory faded, the psychic link between Kaelen and Ignis slowly receded, leaving behind a profound sense of awe and a deep, aching sense of loss for a world that no longer existed. Kaelen pulled his hand back from the dragon's snout, his mind reeling. He felt a strange, tingling sensation on his own forearm. He looked down. There, on the pale skin of his inner arm, was a faint, shimmering pattern, glowing with a soft golden light. It was the same intricate symbol from the vision. It pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light, a perfect echo of the dragon's own slow heartbeat. He stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. He, Kaelen, the nameless orphan, the stable boy, he was a descendant of the dragon speakers. The mark was not a brand or a tattoo, it was an awakening, a dormant piece of his own genetic history, brought to life by the deep, desperate connection he had forged with Ignis. He didn't understand the full implications of what this meant. The knowledge was too vast, too world-shattering to comprehend. But he understood one thing with absolute chilling clarity. His friendship with Ignis was not an accident. It was a destiny, a forgotten bloodline reasserting itself. The mark on his arm glowed for a few more seconds, a secret shared between him and the dying king, and then, as if it had never been, it faded back into his skin, leaving no trace. But Kaelen knew it was there. He could feel it, a quiet humming warmth just beneath the surface. He was no longer just a boy. He was something more. This revelation didn't give him a plan to save Ignis, but it gave him something he hadn't had before, a sense of belonging, a connection to a history far grander than he could have ever imagined. And with that knowledge came a new, unshakable resolve. He would not let Ignis die. He didn't know how, but he would not let them extinguish the last spark of this ancient magical world. The day of the new moon arrived like a death sentence, its pale, thin crescent hanging in the twilight sky like a sharpened scythe. Prince Valerius, eager for the spectacle that would solidify his transition from prince to king upon his impending coronation, had decided to make the cleansing a public event. He envisioned a grand hunt within the royal arena, a final brutal display of his own martial prowess against the broken ancient beast. It was a pathetic and dishonorable plan, designed not for a true challenge, but for the guaranteed bloody triumph that would feed his insatiable ego. Word of the event spread through the palace like a contagion, a mixture of morbid curiosity and fearful excitement. The arena would be filled with nobles and courtiers, all eager to witness the final undignified end of a legend. The news reached Kaelen like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. An arena hunt, not a quiet, merciful end in the darkness of the stables, but a public, humiliating slaughter for sport. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it ignited a fire in his soul, a cold, hard rage that burned away the last vestiges of his fear and helplessness. He would not allow it. He would not stand by and watch his friend be paraded and butchered for the amusement of a vain prince. That night, armed with nothing but his newfound resolve and his intimate knowledge of the stables, he put his own desperate plan into motion. He would not try to fight the entire royal guard. He would not try to reason with the prince. He would do the one thing they would never expect from a simple stable boy. He would set a king free. Using a set of master keys he had secretly copied from the stable master's office months ago, he moved through the sleeping stables like a ghost. He disabled the alarm sensors on the old enclosure with a piece of wire and a steady hand, a trick he had learned from a rogue maintenance droid. The massive iron lock on the gate was ancient and rusted, but Kaelen had spent weeks secretly applying lubricating oils to its mechanism. With a low groaning sound that was almost lost in the rising wind, the great door swung open. Ignis, who had been lying in a heap of exhausted stillness, lifted his massive head, his clouded golden eyes fixing on the boy. A low questioning rumble vibrated in his chest. Kaelen walked into the enclosure, his heart pounding, and placed his hand on the dragon's snout. He didn't speak with his voice, but with his mind, pouring all of his desperation, all of his resolve, all of his pleading into the psychic bond they now shared. "You have to leave," he thought, the message a raw emotional plea. "They are coming to kill you. You have to fly, one last time." He could feel the dragon's profound weariness, the deep bone-deep ache of a body that had long since given up, but he could also feel a flicker of the ancient fire, stirred by the boy's unwavering loyalty. With a monumental effort that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain, Ignis began to rise, his great tattered wings unfurled, stretching to their full magnificent span for the first time in years. He was a shadow of his former self, a magnificent ruin, but he was still a king. Kaelen scrambled to open the massive outer doors of the stable, the ones that led to the high mountain cliffs. The storm had broken, and a fierce howling wind whipped through the opening. It was now or never. The moment the great stable doors groaned open, chaos erupted. A royal guard, making his final patrol before the morning shift, saw the impossible silhouette of the fully winged dragon against the stormy sky and immediately sounded the alarm. Klaxons blared across the palace grounds, their harsh, piercing cries shattering the pre-dawn stillness. Shouts echoed from the barracks as soldiers scrambled, their armor clattering in the darkness. Lights flared to life across the ramparts, casting stark, panicked beams that sliced through the driving rain. Prince Valerius, awakened from his chambers, was incandescent with rage. The stable boy, the pathetic, insignificant stable boy, had dared to defy him. "Capture them," he roared to his captain. "I don't care how you do it, but I want that beast chained in the arena, and the boy brought to me in irons. No one makes a fool of Valerius." Out on the high cliffside adjoining the stables, Ignis stood poised at the edge, the fierce wind whipping around him, tugging at his tattered wings. He was old, he was weak, and he hadn't tasted true flight in decades. For a moment, a profound, weary hesitation seemed to settle over him. Kaelen, standing beside the dragon's massive foreleg, felt the wave of doubt through their psychic bond. He looked back at the approaching torchlight, the dark, armored figures of the royal guard forming a closing ring around them. There was no turning back. He placed both his hands on the dragon's scaled leg, pouring all of his own desperate youthful energy into their connection. "You can do this," he projected, his thought a beacon of pure, unwavering faith. "You are the king of the sky. One last time. Fly." It was in that moment, as the first guards reached the cliff edge, that Kaelen made his final selfless choice. He would not let them capture Ignis. He would not let them punish his friend for his own act of defiance. With a defiant yell, he grabbed a discarded iron pitchfork, a pitiful weapon against plasma rifles, and charged directly at the line of approaching soldiers. It was a suicidal, glorious, and utterly insane act of love. He was just a boy, a stable boy, standing against an army to protect a king. The soldiers paused, momentarily stunned by the sheer unexpected audacity of the charge. They raised their rifles, the green glow of their targeting lasers converging on the small, determined figure. It was a sight that finally shattered the last chains of age and despair that bound Ignis. Seeing the boy, his boy, charging towards certain death for his sake, ignited the last defiant ember of the great dragon's heart into a roaring inferno. With a sound that was not a groan of pain but a full-throated, world-shattering roar of pure, unadulterated fury, Ignis launched himself into the sky. His massive wings, powered by a final desperate surge of adrenaline and love, caught the storm's updraft. He was clumsy, his movements stiff, but he was flying. He circled back, his colossal shadow falling over the stunned soldiers, and let loose a torrent of golden flame, not the weak sputtering fire of a dying beast, but the concentrated, incandescent rage of a true dragon. The soldiers screamed and scattered, their advanced armor no match for the primal, legendary fire. But it was too late for Kaelen. In the chaos, a single panicked shot from a plasma rifle struck him squarely in the chest, and he fell to the cold, wet stone, his world dissolving into a silent, painless darkness. Ignis's roar of grief and fury was a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the sky. Seeing Kaelen fall, the small, fragile spark of life that had rekindled his own, shattered something within the ancient dragon. His flight was no longer a desperate escape. It became a storm of pure, unrestrained vengeance. He descended upon the palace grounds, not as a fleeing animal, but as a living cataclysm, a force of nature unleashed. His fire, which he had not summoned in a century, now poured from his jaws in great liquid torrents of gold, melting the stone ramparts and turning the manicured royal gardens into fields of blackened glass. The royal guards, who had trained their entire lives to fight disciplined armies, were utterly unprepared for the chaotic primal terror of a single enraged dragon. Their plasma bolts, designed to punch through armor, sizzled and dissipated harmlessly against his ancient magic-infused scales. They were insects, swatting at a storm. From his balcony, Prince Valerius watched in stunned disbelief as his perfect, orderly world was consumed by fire and chaos. The beast that he had dismissed as a pathetic relic was now single-handedly dismantling his fortress. The hunt he had planned for his own glory had turned into a desperate, humiliating battle for survival. His arrogance curdled into a cold, venomous rage directed not at the dragon, but at the memory of the stable boy who had caused all of this. It was this defiance, this unthinkable act of a low-born nobody, that was the ultimate insult. "Bring it down," he screamed at his guards, his voice shrill with panic. "I want its head on a spike before dawn." But as the battle raged below, a new sound began to fill the air, a sound even more profound and terrifying than the dragon's roar. It was a low, resonant hum, a vibration that seemed to come not from the sky, but from the space between the stars. The storm clouds, which had been roiling with wind and rain, began to part, not from the dragon's heat, but as if pushed aside by an unseen colossal force. Kaelen, lying on the cold cliff edge, his life fading into a gray, painless haze, was the first to see them. Through his dimming vision, he saw the sky darken, not with clouds, but with shadows. Dozens, then hundreds of massive, impossible silhouettes blotted out the moons, their forms vast and serpentine. It was a fleet of dragons, their scales glittering like 1,000 different constellations in the sudden, eerie calm. They had arrived in absolute silence, a silent, menacing wall of power that dwarfed the palace into insignificance. They were an army of gods, and they had come in answer to a call they had not heard in a millennium. Ignis's roar had not just been a cry of grief, it had been a summons, an ancient distress signal broadcast on a psychic frequency only their kind could hear, the final desperate plea of a lost king. The arrival of the dragon fleet brought a sudden, absolute, and terrifying silence. The battle, the shouting, the roar of Ignis's flame, it all ceased as every being on the ground, from the lowest soldier to Prince Valerius himself, stared up in stunned, uncomprehending awe. The sky was no longer the sky, it was a living, breathing tapestry of scales and wings, a silent, menacing testament to a power that the world of Eridor had long since consigned to myth. These were not the tamed, saddled drakes of the royal stables. These were the ancient ones, the progenitors, beings of immense size and terrifying, intelligent presence. Their collective gaze, 1,000 points of cold, ancient starlight, was fixed upon the scene below. Prince Valerius, who had moments before been screaming for the head of a dragon, now stood frozen on his balcony, his face a mask of pale, incredulous terror. The power he had so proudly wielded, the authority he had taken for granted his entire life, was revealed in this single silent moment to be nothing more than a child's fantasy. He was an insect, posturing in the shadow of gods. The royal guards, who had been scrambling to mount a defense, now dropped their weapons, their discipline shattered by the sheer, overwhelming impossibility of what they were witnessing. Some fell to their knees, their faces buried in their hands, as if the sight itself was too much for their minds to bear. It was a surrender not of tactics, but of the soul. From the center of the vast, silent fleet, a single dragon, far larger than the rest, descended. Its scales were the color of obsidian, shot through with veins of what looked like pure, solidified starlight. This was the Dragon King, the patriarch of the entire brood. He did not land with a crash, but with a silent, graceful power that barely disturbed the air around him. He ignored the terrified prince on the balcony. He ignored the cowering soldiers. His colossal head, larger than a war drake's entire body, turned slowly until his gaze fell upon the broken, bleeding form of Ignis, who now lay exhausted on the palace lawn. A low, mournful sound, a note of profound grief and recognition, rumbled from the Dragon King's chest. He knew this fallen king, but his attention did not linger on the old dragon. His gaze swept across the scene, taking in the chaos, the destruction, and then it settled. It settled on the small, still form of the stable boy lying on the cliff edge. The king's great starlit eyes, filled with an intelligence that was older than the mountains, focused with an unnerving intensity on Kaelen. And then, with a slowness and deliberation that sent a shockwave of disbelief through every conscious mind, the great Dragon King began to move. He walked past the prince, past the guards, past the fallen Ignis, and made his way to the cliff edge. He came to a stop before the body of the boy who was no one, the boy who had done nothing more than show kindness to a forgotten beast. The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The silence on the cliff edge was absolute, broken only by the soft, mournful sigh of the wind. The Dragon King, a being of myth and cosmic power, stood over the small, still form of Kaelen. His sheer scale was incomprehensible. His shadow alone was enough to swallow the entire stable block. Every soldier, every courtier, even Prince Valerius, watched in a state of paralyzed, fearful anticipation, their minds struggling to comprehend what was happening. They expected a final, terrible act of vengeance, a cataclysm of fire that would erase their city from the face of the planet for the crime of harming a dragon. They expected the wrath of a god. But what came was not wrath, it was reverence. The Dragon King, with a slowness that seemed to stretch time itself, lowered his magnificent star-dusted head. It was a gesture of immense, deliberate grace. He brought his colossal snout, large enough to splinter the palace gates, to rest just inches from the fallen stable boy. A soft, warm, golden light emanated from the king's nostrils, a visible, breathing exhalation of pure life force. It washed over Kaelen's body, not with the heat of fire, but with the gentle, penetrating warmth of a new dawn. And then, in a move that shattered every known law of power and hierarchy in the universe, the great Dragon King, the patriarch of the most ancient and powerful species in the known galaxy, bowed. He lowered his head until his horn-like crest touched the cold, wet stone of the cliff, a profound, undeniable gesture of submission and respect to the nameless, dying human child. as if this were a silent cosmic signal. A ripple of movement spread through the sky. The hundreds of dragons in the silent fleet above, in a single breathtaking synchronized movement, all bowed their heads in unison. The sky itself seemed to bend in deference. They were not bowing to the fallen Ignis, their lost king. They were not bowing to the cowering Prince Valerius, the ruler of this world. They were bowing to the stable boy. In that single, silent, impossible moment, the entire power structure of the universe was turned on its head. Valerius, watching from his balcony, felt a wave of nausea. This was not just a defeat, it was an annihilation of his entire worldview. The boy he had dismissed as dust, as less than nothing, was being honored by gods, while he, the prince, was utterly and completely ignored. The golden light from the Dragon King's breath intensified, enveloping Kaelen in a soft, shimmering cocoon. The scorched, blackened wound on his chest, where the plasma bolt had struck, began to change. The burned flesh did not just heal, it seemed to reverse, the cells knitting themselves back together with an impossible speed. A faint, golden, intricate pattern, the very same symbol that had appeared on his arm, now blazed to life on his chest, shining through his tattered shirt. It was the mark, the ancient sigil of the dragon speaker, now fully and irrevocably awakened. He was not just a descendant, he was the first to carry the full, undiluted mark in 1,000 generations. The dragons had not just answered a call of grief, they had answered the call of a long-lost and prophesied heir. Kaelen's return to consciousness was not a sudden jolt, but a slow, gentle unfolding, like a flower opening to a new sun. The pain was gone, replaced by a deep humming warmth that seemed to resonate from the very core of his being. The first thing he saw was a single colossal eye, a universe of molten gold and ancient starlight, regarding him with an expression of profound, gentle wisdom. The Dragon King was still there, his great head bowed, his life force a tangible healing presence. As Kaelen took a breath, a full, clear breath that filled his lungs without a trace of pain, the king lifted his head, a low, resonant rumble of what sounded like satisfaction vibrating through the air, and then a voice echoed in Kaelen's mind. It was not a sound but a thought, a concept, ancient and powerful, yet gentle as a whisper. The speaker has returned. The Dragon King's thought voice resonated, not in any language Kaelen knew, but in a pure, direct transmission of meaning. The bond is restored, the long silence is over. Kaelen sat up, his own body feeling strange, filled with a new, unfamiliar energy. He looked at his chest, where the golden sigil was now fading, receding back beneath his skin like a secret. He was healed. He was more than healed. He felt whole, in a way he had never felt before. The aching loneliness that had been his constant companion was gone, replaced by the profound, overwhelming sense of connection to the hundreds of powerful minds that now watched him from the sky. He was not alone anymore. He was part of something vast, ancient, and magnificent. His gaze fell upon the still, exhausted form of Ignis, who lay nearby, his breathing shallow. A surge of fierce, protective love washed over Kaelen. He scrambled to his feet and approached the old dragon, placing his hands on his scarred, faded scales. He didn't know what he was doing, he only knew he had to try. He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, not with a thought but with a pure, simple feeling, gratitude. He poured all the love and appreciation he felt for the creature who had been his only friend into their bond. "Thank you," he projected. "You did not give up." He felt a faint flickering response from Ignis, a ghost of warmth, a final weary acknowledgement. And then he felt the presence of the Dragon King's mind joining his own, and the minds of 100 other dragons, all lending their strength. They were not just healing Kaelen, they were offering their collective life force to honor their fallen king. The golden light that had healed Kaelen now flowed from his hands into Ignis. It was not a resurrection, but a peaceful, honorable transition, a final gift to a worthy spirit. Under the gentle golden light, surrounded by the silent reverence of his entire species, Ignis, the once glorious, let out one final soft sigh, and was still. It was not a death in a cold, dark stable, but a king's farewell, witnessed by his heir and his people, a profound, beautiful, and heartbreakingly peaceful end to a magnificent life. The aftermath was not a battle, but a silent, undeniable transfer of power. In the cold light of dawn, the Dragon King's gaze finally fell upon the trembling figure of Prince Valerius, who still stood frozen on his balcony. The king did not roar, he did not breathe fire, he simply looked, and in that single ancient, all-seeing gaze, Valerius's entire world of ambition and authority crumbled to dust. His reign was over before it had even begun. The dragons did not need to conquer Eridor. They simply needed to choose its true king, and they had chosen. The royal guards, witnessing the silent judgment, lowered their heads and knelt, not to their fallen prince, but to the new reality that had dawned with the sun. The Dragon King's thought voice once again echoed in Kaelen's mind, clear and absolute. "The nest is now yours to command, little speaker. Guide them, teach them the old ways." Kaelen looked from the colossal dragon to the kneeling soldiers, to the palace that had once been his prison, and a profound, terrifying, and exhilarating understanding settled over him. He was no longer the stable boy, he was something else entirely. He was the bridge, the lost link, the heir to a forgotten covenant between two species. His destiny was not to clean stables, but to rule, not with a crown of gold, but with a heart filled with the quiet, unyielding strength of kindness he had shown to a forgotten beast. He did not become a king in the human sense. He did not sit on the throne or wear the crown. He became a guardian, with the silent, ever-present support of the dragon fleet that now patrolled the skies of Eridor as its eternal protectors. Kaelen dismantled the cruel, hierarchical traditions of the court. The royal stables were transformed into a sanctuary, a place of healing for all creatures, great and small. He, the boy who had once been invisible, now moved through the palace with a quiet authority that no one dared to question. He sought no power for himself, only justice and care for the creatures he had always loved. His first official act was to erect a colossal statue of Ignis at the very highest point of the palace, a permanent golden monument to the forgotten king, whose final act of love had changed the world. Prince Valerius was not executed. At Kaelen's quiet insistence, he was simply stripped of his titles and assigned to a new role, a stable hand, tasked with mucking out the stalls and caring for the very creatures he had once seen as mere tools. It was a fate, Kaelen knew, that was a far more profound lesson than death could ever be. Months turned into years. Kaelen, the boy, grew into a man, his bond with the Dragon King a constant silent conversation, a source of ancient wisdom and profound friendship. He never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the feel of dust on his hands, or the simple, profound joy of sharing a piece of bread with a friend in need. His story became a legend, a whispered tale told across the galaxy, a testament to the fact that true power is not found in armies or crowns or bloodlines, but in the quiet, unassuming, and universe-shattering strength of a single compassionate heart. If you believe that kindness is the greatest power in the universe, then join our community here at Galaxy HFY. Subscribe for more epic stories where the underdog becomes a legend, and don't forget to like this video if you think a single act of compassion can change the world. Let us know in the comments, what other forgotten creature do you think deserves a second chance? Until the next story, stay kind.